Hello, and welcome to this month's Carterette series webinar. I'm Karen Byers. My fellow planning team members are Sarah Steiner and Tessa Minshew. We're excited to be able to highlight trends, innovation, and best practices in Georgia's academic, public, special, and school libraries and archives. While the focus is on highlighting Georgia speakers and programs, the webinars are open to anyone, anywhere, so please bring a friend. We're also on Facebook, so please look us up and like our page so you can keep up with details for future webinars. The Carterette series webinars are hosted by the Professional and Continuing Education Interest Group of the Georgia Library Association. Before I introduce you to Laura, who's today's speaker, I'd like to tell you a few technical things. Oops. Microphone and whiteboard things are disabled for participants. If you have questions, put them in the chat. We'll keep track of them for the presenter to answer at the end of today's session. We can see your private chats, the moderators, so please bear that in mind and consider what you choose to send. If you have any problems with your audio, log out and log back in again. That almost always fixes things. And if you need an attendance certificate, I know our slide says stay to the end for the URL, but we're actually going to mail that out to participants tomorrow. If you're tweeting, our hashtag is Carterette, and we encourage you to use that today. And as I already mentioned, we're hosted by the Professional and Continuing Education Interest Group of GLA. So let me introduce you to Laura Starratt. Laura is a reference archivist at the Atlanta History Center's Kenan Research Center. She's been active and vocal in the profession about the need for practical training and finds the best way to keep competent volunteers and interns is to make sure they get the training they need to secure professional positions. And I would like to say, having done volunteering with Laura for the last 6 months, she runs an excellent program, and I've been grateful to be a part of it. And now I'll hand things over to her.
Hello, everyone. Just making sure everyone can hear me. As Karen told you, my name is Laura Starratt. I am an archivist at the Kenan Research Center, where I spend most of my time at the reference desk. Karen actually recently accepted a position, so she will no longer be volunteering for me because I trained that well. Right, Karen? To start off with, I know many of you are here to find a way to answer the question, how can I get everything done? Let's face it, we never have enough people or money to get all of the things we want done, but volunteers are a great resource that can help us with this. However, we can't just slip into the idea that volunteers are free labor, and we have to remember that just to expect qualified students and new graduates to want to work for us is unfair. They need to get something out of it. Internships and volunteer opportunities are a wonderful way for archivists to mentor aspiring archivists at the same time that they address a growing amount of work with limited resources. We can provide service to our profession by helping to train the next generation as we find creative and constructive ways to respond to budget reductions, which will continue for some time. Now, I was recently at a conference discussing the idea of volunteerism. Volunteerism and internships when someone in the audience brought up the idea of virtual internships in archives. After she finished explaining what she was actually doing, I was just left thinking, well, that's not an internship. The student actually got nothing out of it other than being able to say, oh, I interned at this place. So we really do need to think through the idea of what we're offering and what we're getting in return. Basically, it just confirms why I need to do this presentation. So as I said, my name is Laura Starratt. I'm an archivist at the Atlanta History Center. And to give you some background, I graduated from the University of Tennessee in 2009 with a master's in information science. So how does it make me qualified to talk about volunteer programs? It's because while in school, and even the year after graduating and landing my current position, I spent my time volunteering. As someone who transitions from trying to get experience to someone who is trying to get experience, I can tell you that there are two types of volunteers. Those that want to pass the time and those who want a job. In this presentation, I'm not going to really talk about internships or work programs. I'm talking about people who come to me, or rather my organization, on their own to spend their time working in an archive. Now, just to cover something, I don't really see a difference between volunteers and interns in terms of the work and experience they should get. Yes, there are laws and guidelines for interns, but most of us are in the nonprofit realm and can use volunteers, and we get away with breaking some of those rules and some simply just don't apply to us. So some of you may be wondering what rules I'm talking about. The rules of internships. While this list does regard for-profit organizations, I think we can learn a lot about what we should be doing by researching federal labor laws. There are 6 basic standards that a position must meet in order to qualify as a legitimate unpaid internship. I know there's a lot of writing here, but don't worry, I don't have a lot of writing on most of them. The internship, even though it involves doing actual work, must be similar to training you would get in an educational environment. In other words, they should be treated as though their main task was simply learning, because it is. 2, the experience should be for the benefit of the intern, meaning that they should be doing things that add to their store of knowledge, in contrast to, functioning as a general errand runner, being a placeholder, or, a phone operator, or even a cleaning lady. 3, interns should not displace regular employees. In addition, they should work under close supervision by professional staff. The intern's employer should derive no immediate benefit from an intern's activities. They are not there to contribute to your bottom line. 5, the intern is not necessarily entitled to a paying job at the end of the internship, and the intern and employer both understand at the outset that this is educational experience and that the intern won't be paid. While these rules don't apply to nonprofits or volunteers, I think many of these points are something we need to keep in mind when using interns and volunteers. You can't just sit them down and make them do menial work that you don't want to do. Yes, sometimes you may need someone to make photocopies, but it shouldn't be their primary job. As it is, you are asking them to work for free. If they wanted to do menial work, they could get a job at the coffee shop or a bookstore, where they would not only get paid, but they would get some kind of experience in something. Sure, they'd be learning to make a cappuccino or work a register, but it's more than you would be offering if you're just having them sit at a desk in order to have a warm body there. It's our responsibility to craft meaningful work experiences. In fact, the Society of American Archivists, SAA, guidelines for the graduate program in archival studies fully states internship recommendations. Internships augment and do not substitute for formal education. They should be opportunities for students to be mentored by working archivists. They must be structured. They should be related to an educational program. They should be designed by faculty in collaboration with the host institution. The intern should be supervised, and the intern should also be evaluated. Again, I know that in this presentation, we're talking about volunteers, so most of these aren't going to apply to your circumstances. But I think that the main points brought up by the 2nd, 6th, and 7th are something to keep in mind when using volunteers. You want to be some kind of mentor, even if it is only for the duration of the volunteer period, although no one's going to penalize you for forming mentorship skills. There needs to be supervision and some kind of evaluation, if only, hey, you're doing a good job, and, this could be improved as well. It would be even better if you could schedule a time to sit down and evaluate their work and their perceptions of their work. Not just free labor. Keep in mind that these people are interested in learning. These are not the kids looking to put cash in their pockets. These are students and professionals who are actively pursuing educational activities. Don't squander their enthusiasm. Let me repeat, don't squander that enthusiasm. In fact, think about projects that you're going to be interested in working on. Those are the kinds of projects you should be working your volunteers into. When I graduated with my master's, I volunteered everywhere I could. I got to work on some amazing projects, like encoding finding aids, which gave me experience working with finding aids, as well as E80 and XMetal, an encoding program. I doubt I would have stayed very long at any place that expected me to sit at a desk or direct phone calls, or any library that just wanted me to sit down or go out and shelve books. There's a trade-off. If it's menial, you have to pay. That's basically my philosophy. Why do we do this? Hold on a moment. Is this better? Can everyone hear me? Okay. Well, I hope we do this because we know that these volunteers are going to replace us someday, and we want things to continue to run well. My view resembles what a lot of parents say. I want my kids to be better off than I was. That's what I want for my volunteers. I want them to graduate or go into their first professional job knowing that they are capable, not just hoping they are. I want them to walk into an interview and talk about what they know works and what they've seen fail. I want them to have the experience with the programs and materials they need in order to secure the job they want. I don't want to give you the impression that I'm just all selfless in all of this. I know that if I spend the time to train and teach my volunteers and interns, I'm going to be able to hand off a lot to them. Not to mention the experience I'm getting in supervising a small staff. It's just another career-building skill. I want them to process collections and write blogs about those collections. I want them to help the patrons who come on the reference desk. I want them to answer reference questions that come in by phone or email, and I want them to do a whole bunch of other stuff that I have on my plate. I'm not going to lie, I like having helpers. But to be clear, I like having people who know what they're doing with projects that I'm actively working on. I like having helpers who have learned about our materials, so when I get stuck, they have other solutions that I haven't thought of. I like having helpers that are smart and capable, and I like knowing that I help them get to that point. So what do they expect? They expect to learn what it's like to work in an archives. They don't want to sit around and do menial tasks. As I said before, these are ambitious folks. They have come to learn and to offer their service and experience. Treat them accordingly. They want to come away with some knowledge and experience that will enhance their resume, that will allow them demonstrable experience in the field. They want something they can talk about either in an interview, a conference panel, or in an article. According to a 1945 Society of American Archivists Committee report, the benefits of internships include wider exposure of students to the profession, the raising of standards, and providing additional staff to institutions. Basically, the experience is incredibly important in training a new generation. Sorry. This is important stuff here. Have you looked at job postings these days? Even an entry-level job requires 1 to 3 years of experience. Entry-level jobs. The only way to get experience these days, especially as a student or a new professional, is to volunteer. And let's not forget that they are working for free. After finishing a master's degree, for a job someday that will probably not pay them very much, the least we can do is give them viable experience. I recently came across an article from the Kansas Library Association College and University Library Section Proceedings in 2011 that covered internship planning at Wichita State University. In the article, they actually included an internship plan. It was a straightforward document, complete with name, address, and all of that, but it did ask for 3 objectives to be included in the internship. Well, if it works for interns, it can work for volunteers. Why not have a frank discussion with your volunteers about their intended goals? And it doesn't have to be as concrete as an objective, because volunteers tend to be much more open-ended in their time frames. But this will allow you to see not only how prepared your volunteer is coming in, but also where they are headed in their career plan. They will give you a better handle on what they expect and how it meshes with what you expect. What do you expect? Well, you should expect someone who shows up on time, who is ready to work, and who is engaged in their work. You should also expect to give these people work that will keep them engaged, so they show up on time and are ready to work and are engaged in their work. You should also expect to spend more time than you usually would on normal tasks. If a task takes you 20 minutes, expect to put over an hour in while training someone else to do that exact task. I would love to say that you can just tell someone what you want them to do and they'll just go do it, because, students are just brilliant. But unless it's a task that a monkey can do, it's going to take some time. And we've already covered what I think about those kind of tasks for interns and volunteers. So what do I recommend? Well, as we say in the archives world so often, it might as well be our motto: it depends. What are you looking to do? Personally, I'm looking to create an experience that will allow my volunteers to get on-the-job training. In some cases, I'll have them process collections. In other cases, working at the reference desk. I even have volunteers working on shelf inventories and subject guides. The possibilities are endless, but the question really is, what do they want to do? What do they want to do? Yes, I know I mentioned this before, but you really do need to find out what their interests are. This is something you'll have to find out from them. Sometimes it takes longer than you expect. Most of my volunteers are not doing this for school credit, so I consider them long-term, which means I can put them to work on other tasks until I get an idea of what they want or what they feel comfortable telling me what they want to do. You want to make sure your volunteers are at least feel like they're being used efficiently. Exactly, yes. I work as a reading room manager, so I do spend a lot of time at the reference desk. In the archives field, we don't tend to teach reference, so I like my volunteers to spend some time at the desk. Personally, I think it's the best way to get a feel for materials we have and what our patrons look for when researching. Not only that, but since this is not something that is usually taught in the archival program, I feel it gives my volunteers a leg up. So that's where I start people out. From there, I find that I get a sense of what they're interested in, and I like to put them to work in some capacity that they have a natural inclination for. For instance, I had one volunteer, and Sarah, you said you didn't want to do an inventory, but I had one volunteer who, when there was no other work, would go into the stacks and just read the titles of the books. He said that it gave him a sense of what we had and what we were interested in collecting. So I put him in charge of the shelf inventory of our genealogy collection. It's not something terribly involved, but it is an addition to the reference help he offers patrons. He feels like he's accomplishing something and enjoys it. It's a tangible task that has a defined end and that he's going to get to finish it. Another volunteer likes to do historic research, so we designated him the go-to guy for answering reference questions that come in through email. You'll have to go back and check the work, or even make initial notes on how to start, and note places you don't want them to overlook before you can give anyone the question, but he is doing the research himself, and he really enjoys it. He likes leaving each day having not only helped someone answer a question, but also learning more about history and new search methods. I have another volunteer who's still in school. She's perfectly happy at the desk registering people, relating the rules, and directing them on how to start their research. In the meantime, she has time to work on her own projects and homework. What can they do? I've mentioned a few projects that my volunteers have worked on, but what they can do depends on their education and experience and the amount of time you are interested in putting forth. According to the Guidelines for Graduate Archival Education Programs from the Society of American Archivists in 1977, the focus should be on acquisitions, processing, preservation, and reference. I believe that kicks out projects that include dusting shelves and sharpening pencils. But I do have to ask myself certain questions when deciding to take on a new volunteer. Like, do I have the time to trail them as they work the reference desk? Can I follow them around while they're working with patrons? Can I spend the afternoon answering questions they have while processing a collection? What is it that they're interested in doing? Do we have any projects that are interested or that are in line with their interests? Are they looking for experience cataloging or digitizing materials? Are they looking to work on specific with specific programs like Archivist Toolkit or Content DM? These questions need to be answered before you decide to bring on a new volunteer. Because if you don't have time or they don't want to work on the projects you have going, then they aren't going to get anything out of this volunteering and they're just going to quit. Sorry, I needed a little water. Now, not everyone is going to be capable of the same tasks. This is a harder area to navigate because who wants to say, look, maybe this isn't for you? But it happens. That's not to say that if someone starts asking a lot of questions you don't have time to answer, that they can't handle a task. But if you don't have the time, you'll need to move that volunteer to a project that you will have time to supervise. I had a volunteer once who did nothing but ask questions. Yes, it was tiring, but I knew she was learning as she was working, and she never asked the same question twice. Also, if you have a volunteer who asks a lot of the same questions over and over again, consider retraining the volunteer. I know it's easier to blame the volunteer, but often it's us. We as supervisors often don't realize that we've done a terrible job explaining ourselves. Now, if you have students, you will want to try to marry the theory that they are learning with the work they are doing. The best volunteer positions are those that allow a student to verify their understanding of archival principles by applying them in real-life situations, and to understand how to make adjustments so that theory fits practice. Or if you have someone who is considered entering the field, you want to allow that possible student to walk into a program having enough practical background needed to understand how this practical experience derives from and or drives theory. Students need to learn that problem solving, which is something I really try to focus on with training reference volunteers. They need to understand what it is like to work in an archive, not their idea of what an archive is. In following that, they need to learn how to function in a work environment where communication, accountability, and sharing knowledge is at the top of our duties. Now, my number one qualification when bringing in a new volunteer is how much time do I have? Following along with my question of what can they do is the question of how much time do you have to train these volunteers? I'm not going to sugarcoat it. As I said before, everything takes longer when you're training someone. I learned this way back when I was waiting tables in college. If something would take me just about 15 minutes to do it myself, it'll take over an hour to show someone else how to do it. And that's just showing them how to do it. Unless they have amazing recall or write every step down, complete with fancy screen captures, they're going to have to ask questions repeatedly until they're comfortable doing that task on their own. I want to be completely clear on this. In the short term, training a volunteer is so much more trouble than it's worth. In the long term, you will have helped shape a new professional. Hold on, sound goes down again. But if you're looking to get your work done by someone else, that's not what this is about. To have a successful training program for volunteers, you need to put in so much time. So what do I do? I'll be honest, the majority of my volunteers work at the reference desk. It's where I spend half of my time, so it only makes sense that that's what my volunteers will be doing. Reference in the archives profession is not something that is actively taught in school, as I mentioned before. It is seen more as a, well, we all know how to research, so we'll just rely on our ability to do that. Coming from a program that was heavily focused on library science, I know that not to be the case. So the volunteers I get are usually put on the desk to start. When I started, there was a very limited overall training session to discuss the reading room and the types of materials that our collections hold. I created some more handouts on policy, a few quizzes, and set up tours of the reading room and our access points. I try to make sure that our volunteers can give at least one supervised tour to a new patron, if not more, or at least until they feel comfortable. And by a tour, I mean I have my volunteers take a new patron to each of our access points, explain how to use them, give them an explanation of what materials are in the reading room and how to use them, and how to start their research. For the first few months, you will have to trail your volunteers. And when I say trail, I mean every time they go on a tour, I follow them around. I am there whenever they're dealing with patrons. After that, you just have to trust them. This means you won't get any work done in the meantime. No, the volunteers can have experience. This is just something that you're going to have to get used to when deciding to train volunteers, the fact that you'll have no time to do anything else. Eventually, your volunteers, though, will be able to train other generations of volunteers. If you don't train them for at least a little while, they will learn bad habits or make mistakes and continue to make mistakes. If you want to keep good volunteers, you need to keep them interested. You need to make sure you are meeting their expectations and allowing them to work on the kinds of projects they want to work on. But more than that, you have to treat them well. Like it or not, you as a supervisor are a pretty important component of the volunteer experience. So how you treat your volunteers is something you are going to have to consider. You will need to hone in the experience, tailor it to your volunteer, be hands-on or hands-off as that volunteer needs. You will need to be interactive, approachable, willing to learn, inclusive, and you have to treat your volunteers with respect. As a supervisor, you will need to show your volunteer how to behave professionally. You will need to act as a teacher and consultant, as mentor, and also as an evaluator. What else do you have to do? Your primary goal is to give your volunteer the idea of the profession. Give your volunteer an idea of the profession. You'll need to treat them as staff members, walk them through administrative regulations, give them copies of policies and manuals. In the reading room, I've given handouts on policies and then quizzed my volunteers. After the quiz, when they are feeling dejected or worried or like they can't do anything right, I simply asked them where to find the information that they were quizzed on. Where would they go if in a real-life situation they needed to find that information? Well, that's easy, they said. It'll be right here. And then I informed them that's all they really need to know. While it's nice if a volunteer can memorize every policy we have, it is unlikely that they'll be able to do so. In my experience, the important thing is for them to realize that they won't remember everything, and that we have paperwork for them to rely on. Also that I am standing right there for them. I introduce them to my coworkers, and I make sure that they know they can go to my coworkers if I'm not there to answer questions. I explain what I expect from them as volunteers. Basically, I treat them as if they were staff members. But they are not staff members. You must also remember that your volunteers are coming in with little to show for it. If you are not giving them meaningful work experience, prepare to see them leave. Also, if you're overly critical, prepare to see them leave. I know this may seem obvious, but you need to be more flexible with volunteers. When I correct a volunteer, I first try to find out why they chose the path that they did. From there, I'm able to explain why other ways may be better. Volunteers are less likely, in my experience, to cut corners just to finish their project. They don't have definitive deadlines, and the volunteer is working on something that engages them, so they're not going to rush through something just to get it done. In fact, if you were taking the time to correct them, they are probably thankful. They aren't interested in making mistakes, but people make mistakes. In my case, my volunteers will overlook something in giving reference help. There is no reason to make your volunteer feel bad for making a mistake. I can promise you they did not mean to do it, and usually they probably feel a lot worse than I do about making that mistake. Of course, I make a point of explaining why they did something wrong. I show them how they could have done it, but I don't harp. I don't make them feel bad, and I always explain that I can see why they would do something that way. And as long as they didn't set fire to the stacks, it'll be okay. I've had volunteers give patrons wrong information, so I will pull a volunteer aside and tell them what they did was wrong, and then let the volunteer correct the error with the patron. This is why you must always be available. These people are here because they want to be here. They're not here for a paycheck. They're not here for school credit. Often other things in their lives will come up, and you can't expect them to drop everything for a volunteer gig. That's not to say that you can't criticize a volunteer. There's a level of professionalism that is required in any position. And if your volunteers aren't meeting that, you need to address it. If you have consistent communication and they are aware of their responsibilities, they will usually know why they are receiving these corrections. You also have to be available. Consistent communication, regular meetings, they don't have to be held every week. They don't even have to be formal. But you do need to be available and also approachable to your volunteers. Pull them aside for a few minutes and ask them how things are. Ask them if they want to set some time aside to discuss anything. You want to do this, and they should know you want to do this. They should be able to come to you when they don't understand some aspect of their task. As I said before, you should be acting as teacher and consultant, mentor, and evaluator, and you simply can't do any of that if you're not around. Your volunteers' workspaces should be near yours, and they should be comfortable for asking you questions. So, in the end, supervising volunteers isn't a cakewalk. You have to put the time in, you have to put the energy in, and you really have to think about what you're doing. These are the people who will be in the profession before you know it, and you want to make sure that they have some idea of what they're doing. And you want them to take on the task of training and offer experiences to the next generation. The only way to do that is to be there, offer meaningful experiences, and train these volunteers yourself. And it looks like I ran a little early, so does anyone have lots and lots of questions? Does anyone else have suggestions on other projects? Okay, the question is, my volunteers are generally teenagers. Would you approach things differently for them? Yes, I pretty much approach everything differently for everyone. With teenagers and high school students, unless they have a real interest in the field, I probably would put them on more menial tasks. Not to say that I would give them menial tasks, but I would spend less time explaining things than actually having them work on things. I don't have many volunteers that are teenagers, so I can't really be too clear on that. How well do my coworkers work with the volunteers? To be honest, I have exceptional coworkers. They are always willing to help out. If I have a volunteer who has any question, they have no problem going to a coworker and asking them questions, and the coworkers basically respond as if they're responding to me. So I have great coworkers. Do I have, let's see if I missed one. Do I have minimum requirements for accepting a volunteer? As I mentioned before, we try to take people who are in college or above, retirees. So I think probably just the age. As far as us, we do work in an archive, so we have unique materials, which means you know, we have to have a little more experience working with them. Not to say that experience, but age-wise experience. So I guess that would be my minimum requirement. Also, we do have interviews for all of our volunteers. If you want to be a volunteer, you fill out an application. We have an interview with you first to decide if you'd be a good fit here. Do you have any suggestions about recruiting volunteers? No, but I would love to hear some. I just go around begging people. Are there any follow-up questions on the questions I've asked? Yes, library programs would be a great place to start. We do have Clayton State down here that's starting their big archives. I think archives management is what they have, but everybody wants them. So I have heard presentations about students who are looking for local repositories to work in while they do go to other programs. I know San Jose State has a giant archives program, so a lot of people do that, the distance education there, and then need somewhere else to work. So that's also, yeah, a good idea. And I do have a volunteer who is actually at the Valdosta program. So I do have that. The only thing that I have, there's really any kind of issue with using us going through the schools is that they are really focused on internships, which tend to have, they want you to have something set up for the students to pick and come to, and I really have only been here for a year, so I don't have a full setup going. I don't have, you know, a list of projects for people to work on, or, you know, the whole internship program. It's a little more involved than I have right now, but we are going to be trying to get into that in the next couple of years. We've always had volunteers at the Kenan Research Center, but mostly it's been just answering reference questions. They've basically been kind of like our research staff. I've tried to take it more in an educational way to use students and younger folks who are looking to get into the field. It hasn't been a major diversion, but yeah, just trying to get more students involved, trying to really kind of focus it more than just here's questions and do some research, but actually find out what we need done and how that works with the with educational experiences. Oh, it's definitely true. Mary says that her Detroit-based school has students from 40 states, and that if there was any kind of structured program students would be interested in. As I said, though, we don't really have anything technically structured so much. I do like to bring people in, see what they're interested in, try to find a way to fit them in. As I mentioned, there is that Wichita State program that I'm actually going to, not program, but that application that I'm going to try to actually start working into my volunteer interviews. Exactly, Sarah. Volunteering is a great way to find out what type of library or even what type of archives you're interested in working in, or any kind of informational environment. As I mentioned to people, as I mention to students all the time, I'm like, if you want to get experience, if you want to learn more about a specific type of organization, volunteer. People always want people to work for free. It's great, but sometimes that's hard to do. And Marcy posted about getting hands-on experience, and I completely believe in that. Karen and I both went to University of Tennessee, and they are primarily focused on theory. So you go into the classes, you learn all the theory, and then when you come out, you have to find some way to make that theory translate into something practical. You have to work on some kind of project yourself, and hands-on experience is exactly what volunteers should be looking for. Student organizations are a great way to do that. I know when I was at UT, we had a special library organization, a Tennessee library organization, an ALA, a number of different student organizations that were very, very active. Carolyn, I don't think many people really post anything for volunteers. It's more you kind of have to take that upon yourself to go out to any kind of organization, ask if they want volunteers. I think the Atlanta History Center has some kind of website that has an application for volunteering. I don't think we don't do too much with, well, we have volunteers and interns here, but we don't really have, most places won't put out an ad, because I think in most places you have to pay to put out an ad. So to advertise for volunteers, I don't think they normally do that. Internships, more likely because they have put the effort into actually putting together an internship program, so they're interested in filling that. And yes, Carrot is an amazing volunteer. Yes, very exactly, along with experience references. When Karen applied for this past job, she asked me to be a reference, and they never called me, so they just must have hired you right off the bat, knowing how wonderful you are. But structured volunteering, yeah, as I said, I like to kind of approach volunteers as interns, to know when they're coming in, what they want to do, what kind of project they're working on, what kind of time frame they're looking at. And if you do a good job, definitely I'm going to write you a reference. I'm good at being a reference. I'm going to try to talk to you as much as possible. As I used to say in school, if you do something well, I'm going to highlight it, because if the people that I'm associating with are doing well, then they're going to be good references for me. So if my volunteers, work well, I'm going to try to get them out there, because in the long run, they're going to turn around and be like, Laura's great too. That's good, only be good for me. Yeah, it is a multi-step process, because there are a lot of people who prefer to work at the museum. In fact, there's like a little checkbox on our application for volunteering that lets you decide whether you want to volunteer for the museum or the library or anything like that. And a lot of people check all of them, and you read through the application, you find out exactly, this person doesn't want to work here, they want to work in the museum. But definitely try going to places that you would be interested in working. And I know they always say that go to places that you're interested in working, and then see if you can, I'm not saying that you're going to be able to get a job there, but you are going to understand what it's going to be like to work in a place that you're interested in working. And Claudia, yes, we do get retired librarians. We get a lot of people. I think it's something about our field. When I was in school, the average age was, for our program, was I think 35 to 40, somewhere in there. A lot of people see information science programs as a second career. they've done their main career and they kind of want something else to do. So it's something that it still keeps you going, it keeps you thinking. The research is exciting. So we get a lot of retirees. We get a lot of people who are interested in genealogy, especially here. I would have to say that most of our volunteers are retirees, and not just retired librarians, but retirees.
Are there any other questions right now? Okay, well, we'll go ahead and wrap up. Thank you all so much for your attendance today. We hope you found this session enjoyable and informative. So on our next slide, you'll see a URL for the assessment for this session, which we hope you'll fill out. Your feedback is important to us and does influence the decisions that we make. If you have an idea for a topic or presenter for future webinars, please let us know. You'll see all of our email addresses. Let's see. Oh, they're not on the slide. Okay, they were on the first slide. And they're also available through the GLA Wiki, which is the main page for the Carterette webinars. So if you have any questions or any suggestions or any comments, we would love to hear what you have to say. Thanks again for coming, and you'll get a follow-up email tomorrow.